She thought it was just another ordinary shift, another night of cleaning up after people who barely looked her in the eye. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the fryer, the endless orders barked across the kitchen. But inside that restaurant, something darker simmered beneath the surface, something far more dangerous than spilled wine or broken glass. When the manager called her name, it sounded harmless enough. Just another demand, another task. But the moment the door closed behind her, the air changed. The lights flickered slightly and silence filled the narrow, tiled room. Her reflection trembled in the mirror as his shadow grew closer. What began as a talk twisted into something sinister. His words, laced with arrogance. His hands tightening where they didn't belong. She froze, fear racing through every vein, her voice caught between survival and disbelief. Because this wasn't just about disrespect. It was about power. The kind of power that believed skin color made someone disposable. But outside that door, another story was unfolding. A man in a tailored suit stood quietly in the hallway, adjusting his cufflinks. He was there to surprise his wife after her shift, to take her home like he always did. He didn't expect to hear muffled sounds from behind that bathroom door, or the voice he loved, shaking, pleading, fighting for breath. In that single second, something inside him snapped. The world would soon learn that this woman wasn't just another waitress. She was married to someone no one dared cross. And the man behind that door had no idea that he had just touched the wife of a man whose name whispered fear in every back alley of the city. What happened next would shatter the line between justice and vengeance. Because when love, rage, and power collide, mercy is the first thing to die. What would you do if the one person you loved was humiliated for the color of their skin, and you had the power to make the world pay for it? Would you walk away, or would you make them remember her name forever? Before the chaos, before the headlines and the whispers that spread through every corner of the city, there was just her, Amara, a woman whose life revolved around quiet strength, the kind that doesn't make noise but survives storms. Every morning she woke before the sun, tied her hair back, and slipped into her crisp uniform. A white shirt, black tie, the kind of outfit that made her invisible in the world she served. To most people, she was just the waitress, a shadow moving between tables, carrying other people's comfort while ignoring the ache in her own feet. She worked at the Glass Room, a high-end restaurant where luxury didn't just shine, it looked down on you. The walls were marble, the laughter expensive, the conversations careless. Guests wore watches worth more than her yearly salary, and yet she smiled. Because she had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride. Her co-workers were a mix of weary faces and forced grins. But there was one constant. Her manager, Mr. Cole. A man who hid cruelty behind charm, who smiled at customers and sneered at his staff. He had a reputation, the kind of man who saw people like Amara as replaceable. And worse, untouchable by consequence. Still, Amara kept her head down. Her world outside this restaurant was everything she worked for. A small apartment with soft lighting, a kitchen that always smelled like jasmine and roasted coffee, and a husband who treated her like she was the heartbeat of his world. Dominic, a man whose presence could quiet a room before he spoke. She never told anyone much about him. People assumed he was just another blue-collar worker. Quiet, humble. She liked it that way. It kept things peaceful. But peace, she knew, was fragile. The tension at work had been growing for weeks. It started with glances, too long, too personal. Then came the small accidents. A hand brushing too close when she reached for a tray. Comments disguised as jokes, the kind that made her skin crawl. She wanted to speak up, but she also knew what happened to those who did, because Amara had seen it before, how people like her lost their jobs, their safety and sometimes their dignity, all for telling the truth. So she endured, until that night, the restaurant was closing. The last guests had left, and the air smelled of bleach and fading perfume. Amara wiped the last counter, ready to clock out when she heard it, her name sharp and cold. "Amara, come here." Her chest tightened. She turned to see Mr. Cole standing by the hallway that led to the staff restrooms. His tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, that same smirk that had haunted her dreams. Every instinct told her to walk away. But fear has a way of paralyzing even the strongest souls. She followed him, hesitant steps echoing off the tiles. The hallway lights flickered, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. At that exact moment, in the parking lot outside, Dominic leaned against his car. He checked his watch, smiling softly. He had come early to pick her up. It was their tradition. Every Friday night after her shift, they'd go for coffee at a small diner by the pier. She'd talk about her day and he'd listen. He always listened. He didn't know she was just steps away from danger. Inside, the manager's tone shifted. From words to orders. From arrogance to threat. The tension in the air turned suffocating, like a storm closing in. Amara's hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Outside, Dominic heard faint sounds. A noise, barely noticeable, from the back corridor window. His instincts sharpened. Something wasn't right. Amara's reflection in the mirror didn't look like her anymore. She saw fear etched into her own face, the kind she thought she'd left behind in childhood, fear of being small, powerless, unseen. She wanted to scream, but her voice felt trapped under the weight of disbelief. Because the worst kind of horror isn't sudden. It's when you realize it's been waiting for you all along, and behind that bathroom door, horror had just found her. Meanwhile, Dominic began walking toward the building. Each step heavier, faster. He still didn't know what he was about to see, or how much blood it would take to erase the moment that was seconds away from happening. Because sometimes fate doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. And that night, it was coming for vengeance. The hallway swallowed sound the way the ocean swallows light. Fluorescents hissed. Plumbing moaned somewhere in the walls, and the tiled floor carried a cold that rose through shoes and bone. Amara kept telling herself to breathe, to count the seconds, to stay small enough to survive this minute and the next. Survival had always been a quiet art. Read the room, dodge the storm, find a way to smile through the bruise no one sees. But the storm had learned her name, and the bruise wanted an audience. The hand that dragged her was practiced, fingers aiming at fabric first, then at throat when the fabric resisted. He liked control more than he liked people. Power made him audacious. The history behind her skin made him certain nothing would happen to him. In this city, he had learned, plenty of doors stayed closed for people like Amara. He trusted those closed doors more than locks. Her mind ran to ordinary things because terror makes the ordinary holy. A folded napkin on the counter. A polished glass that reflected a smudge of light. A half-written note to herself in the pocket of her apron. Buy jasmine rice. Remember to water the plant. She clung to those small anchors while a larger wave rose to drown her. Outside, Dominic crossed the lot like a shadow with a heartbeat. His suit hid the coiled readiness of a man who had fed too many wolves to know which one would bite next. He carried himself the way men do when they have nothing left to fear and everything to lose. He listened to the building with a predator's focus, catching the wrong rhythm inside, silence pressed too hard against one door and nowhere else. Instinct turned his steps toward the back corridor, past the grease bins and the cigarette ash that curled along the concrete like burned-out worms. Inside the bathroom, Amara stared at her reflection the way sailors stare at the horizon, hoping to find land where only water is promised. Sweat had threaded across her hairline. Another hand flattened her into tile. Another breath, his, not hers, trespassed against her cheek. She felt the weight of centuries in the tilt of his body, in the smug certainty that the night would end the way he wanted because nights always had. Streets remember what has happened to women like her. Restaurants remember who gets believed. Offices remember who gets to laugh about it tomorrow. Fear moved through her like electricity, then snapped into clarity. She had survived other hands. She had walked home past men who trailed her footsteps. She had been told to smile by strangers who turned their compliments into commands. She had said nothing when promotions passed her by because customers wanted a certain kind of face at the front. She had watched management abide the loudest complaints from the richest tables and dismiss the softest pleas from the darkest workers. She had muted herself, and muting had cost her piece by piece. Tonight the bill arrived. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The sink mirror doubled and tripled her. One Amara braced against tile, one Amara clenched around the tremor, one Amara raising eyes to the fluorescent hum to measure if anyone would hear. The handle on the door had not fully latched. It wobbled with every shove of the body behind her. She marked the wobble like a compass mark, a tiny hope in a room designed for humiliation. Down the corridor, Dominic's hand touched the wall and felt the shiver of impact. Tile sang. He let out one long exhale through his nose and pictured his wife's hands wrapped around a coffee cup, the soft smile she kept for late-night stories. He let the picture become fire. He did not kick the door yet. He did not roar. Years of ruling wolves had taught him that the quietest step changes the room the fastest. He wanted the room to change before anyone had time to rearrange their stories. Amara made a decision. Not the kind that rescues a life in a blaze of victory, but the kind that keeps a soul from leaving. She pulled her chin down, tucked her throat away from the line of his grip, shifted her weight the way her grandmother had taught her for those rare nights when boys on the block forgot that girls had brothers. She turned herself from prey into problem. The fingers at her tie tightened. The pressure at her sternum gathered like a storm's first punch. Her shoulder hit tile. The wobble of the door shivered again. In another corner of the restaurant, the dishwasher rattled to a stop. A busser, halfway through stacking plates, froze at the sudden quiet. He glanced toward the corridor, saw the manager had not signed anyone out, and returned to his stack because rent is a ruthless teacher. He told himself the sounds he almost heard were plumbing. He convinced himself that tomorrow morning the sun would warm the sidewalk the same as always, and his head would not be full of what-ifs. Denial is easy when it protects a paycheck. Silence is easy when it protects a body. Dominic reached the corridor corner and paused. He checked for cameras, counted a pair that had been angled just so, and filed their positions into the cold ledger of his mind. He pushed his cuff back, revealing a scar that looked like a pale comma, a reminder that his life had never ended where people expected. He slid forward until the bathroom door filled his vision, until he could make out the rasp of breath on the other side that belonged to a woman who never begged for anything. Amara felt the cold edge of a paper towel dispenser press into her elbow. The manager's knee knocked at the back of her leg to buckle it. Spittle dotted her cheek. The fluorescent light stuttered overhead, stamping the room with a flicker that made time stumble. She clenched her teeth, not to hold back a scream, but to keep from breaking herself against the fury that had finally dared to wake. Somewhere in the building, a timer beeped and kept beeping. The sound made her think of heart monitors, of flat lines, of all the ways machines announce an ending. She refused the ending. She anchored her mind to Dominic's tradition. The cup of coffee, the pier, the way he always positioned himself to hold the door with his body between her and anyone else. She took that memory and made it a brace for the next second. The next second arrived with the door's flimsy latch giving up a sigh. The panel quivered inward a finger's width. Air slipped past it in a narrow, cool exhale. The man behind her didn't notice. He was busy choreographing his version of control. He believed the room was his. He believed history was on his side. He believed her silence had no husband. Dominic closed his eyes once, not in prayer but in calibration. He measured the hinge by the rasp it made, measured the handle's give, measured the breath between the muffled thuds. He put a palm on the door and pushed it just enough to taste the room. The smell of bleach mixed with the sour reek of fear. He did not step inside, not yet. He wanted the man to feel something happen to the room and not know what it was. He wanted the man to understand that the world could turn against him between one heartbeat and the next. Amara sensed the shift in air the way migratory. Birds sense weather. Some old instinct woke and said now. She planted one foot, twisted her shoulder, and leveraged the edge of the sink to create space nobody had granted her. The hand on her tie slipped just enough for breath to be possible again. She didn't waste it on pleading. She burned it on focus. She mapped the room like a chessboard, looked for angles, counted the inches to the door, and listened with everything in her for a sound she recognized. It came, a breath she knew better than her own. The sound steadied her spine. A heat ran across her skin that was not shame now, not dread, but the electricity of witnesses. She would not leave this room as a ghost in someone else's story. She would not have her life explained by anyone who had not paid for it in love. The manager, irritated that control had slipped for a second, jerked her back into position and stepped closer. He muttered a threat that sounded like paperwork wrapped around a punishment, a reminder that wherever he couldn't touch her body, he could still touch her paycheck. The sight of his reflection leaning over hers, the way his mouth twisted, the way his confidence grew each time she tried to be smaller, lit a fuse inside her she had spent years keeping damp. She chose movement over meekness. She drew her knee not as an attack but as a wedge, pivoted again, and cut his balance by a single crucial degree. He slammed a forearm against the tile to catch himself. The smack traveled through the wall like a gunshot muffled by water. Dominic pushed the door open without noise and stepped into the room with the inevitability of a verdict. He did not shout. He did not announce. He let presence do what presence does when it has been earned by men who outlived worse nights. The room recalibrated. Power, which had been hoarded by one body, rebalanced itself around another. Amara's eyes flicked to the mirror. For an instant, she saw all three of them, the man who believed nothing would happen to him, the woman who refused to vanish, and the husband whose gaze made promises no court could enforce, but every street understands. Relief punched through her so hard it almost bent her, followed by an aftershock of rage that straightened her even taller. Dominic's jaw tightened the way mountains tighten when the first tremor warns of an avalanche. He took in the hand at his wife's clothing, the sweat on her brow, the mark at her collarbone where pressure had been. He took in the sink, the angle of his wife's shoulder, the way the fluorescent light cast a cruel whiteness across brown skin like an accusation she never deserved. He filed each detail in a vault that would never forget. The manager spun halfway, startled out of arrogance, then tried to drag confidence back onto his face as if grooming a mask. He stood to his full height and assumed that the rules beyond this room would still protect him, that the man in the doorway would choose peace or paperwork or some kind of brittle civility. He assumed wrong, but assumptions had carried him far enough in life that he mistook them for truth. The air turned heavy, then still. The mirror fogged slightly, as if the room itself wanted to hide its eyes from what would follow. A drop of water fell from a faucet and cracked the silence into quarters. Amara centered herself. She felt the urge to collapse into tears and refused it, not because tears were weakness, but because she wanted her body to remember what it felt like to stand upright in the moment. Humiliation tried to turn her to ash. She would not give this man any version of her that looked like surrender. Dominic moved closer. One step, then another. He let each step speak. He let his eyes hold steady. He let the manager understand that this was not a scene to be negotiated. This was a debt call. Somewhere in the back of Dominic's mind lived a ledger of all the small and large injuries that had marked the woman he loved since the first time she described being followed in a store. Since the first time a taxi splashed her with rain and laughter from the window trailed behind it. Since the first time a cop demanded her ID while she waited for a bus that never came. He had kept those injuries like uncollected accounts. Tonight, one came due. The manager attempted a performance, indignation paired with bureaucratic certainty. He adjusted his sleeves as if this were a misunderstanding resolved by policies he had written. He glanced at the door as if the building itself would rise to defend him. He reached for the space in the conversation where men like him usually find safety. The presumption that a black woman's pain comes with a discount, that a black couple's anger can be turned into trespass with a single phone call. That authority remains on his side as long as he pretends to be calm. Dominic did not give him that space. He kept moving forward until only inches remained, until the mirror flanked them with duplicate versions of the same confrontation. He tilted his head once, taking in the man the way one takes in a problem that has dressed up as a person. He breathed out, and the exhale shivered the candle flame of the manager's performance. Amara watched the scales shift and felt something return to her body that had been stolen at the door. Her hands steadied. Her chest stopped quaking. The room, while still cruel, no longer belonged to humiliation. It belonged to witnessing, and yet the danger had not passed. Danger never passes just because the right person enters a room. It adapts. It looked now for exits and alibis. It remembered cameras. It remembered phones. It remembered how quickly the world recasts aggressors into victims the moment the targets refuse to be gentle. On cue, footsteps crept down the corridor, another employee drawn by the wrongness humming through the building. A door swung somewhere. The dishwasher resumed its churn. The world outside the bathroom started inventing a version of this night that would be easier to swallow in the morning. The lie began writing itself like an automated script. Dominic understood timelines better than most. He measured the seconds remaining before the first excuse arrived, before the first call tried to transform his presence into threat. He chose a different clock. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and placed his phone on the edge of the sink. Tilted up, lens capturing the tableau, not to beg sympathy, not to canvass likes, but to trap the truth in glass. The manager flinched. Not at the lens, but at what it implied, that there would be a record not authored by him. He gathered his voice, steadied it into a tone he had used in boardrooms, and began constructing his defense with practiced rhythm. He emphasized his position. He invoked policy. He dressed his proximity to Amara in the language of concern and procedure. He jumped ahead to outcomes that made him rescuer, not captor. He calculated the likelihood that this suited stranger would choose discretion over scandal. Amara felt the nausea that comes when reality is rewritten in front of your face. She had endured it in smaller rooms, classrooms where teachers acted like her questions were disruptions, stores where clerks tailed her through aisles, offices where top roles always somehow ended up in the same kind of hands. She recognized the pivot and wished she could set it on fire. Tonight she didn't have to. The fire had already walked in. Dominic's eyes didn't leave the manager's face. He didn't blink with outrage. He blinked with judgment. He let the man's justifications evaporate in the heat of that scrutiny. Then he let the silence return, heavier now, weighted with consequence. The corridor filled with another presence. One of the line cooks, broad-shouldered, apron-stained, history written in scars, stopped at the threshold. His eyes flicked from Amara's collar to the manager's hands to Dominic's posture. He inhaled slow. He had a sister. He had a mother. He had watched men like the manager let their voices drag women out of rooms more times than he could count. He had also watched what happens when a man like Dominic decides a line has been crossed. He stayed back because he knew the difference between helping and interfering. Amara's mind raced ahead to the part where officials arrive and penciled versions of the truth. She thought of the questions. Why were you in the bathroom? What did you do to escalate? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? She wondered if the camera would save her or become just another thing they point at while telling her she misread her own fear. She straightened again. If the world demanded poise from the wounded, she would give poise made of stone. Dominic took another step, and the manager took one back without meaning to. The mirror caught the recoil and multiplied it. The tone of the night changed key. The chorus of the building, the hums, drips, rattles, shifted into an audience that waited to see which story would win. Men like the manager trusted that history would applaud them. Men like Dominic wrote their own endings with ink that didn't wash out. A radio crackled somewhere near the host stand. The busser's hands trembled over a stack of glasses. A server's group chat lit with messages the way dry brush lights with sparks. Something's happening. Did you hear that noise? Don't get involved. Oh my God, that's her. Stay out of it. He's going to handle it. Who is that guy? I think that's her husband, the one who never talks. Rumor ran faster than truth and began shaping itself into the city's favorite hobby, narrative. Dominic let the phone continue recording, but the real record was being etched into every nervous system in earshot. He angled his body just enough that anyone who entered would understand he was the center of gravity now. He lifted his hand, not to strike, not to threaten, but to gesture toward his wife in a way that made the room admit her humanity. The gesture was simple. It dismantled the manager's pretense more thoroughly than any speech. The manager scrambled for the one refuge many cowards pick when cornered, policy converted into accusation. He began naming infractions he could attach to Amara, penalties he could attempt to assign, the administrative maze he could trap her in. He talked rapidly. The words sounded like storyboards he had used 100 times. He planned to drown the night in paperwork and turn survival into an uphill appeal. Amara felt the old fatigue press on her like a second body. Then she felt something older rise to meet it. The refusal her ancestors packed into their bones when they moved through cities that never wanted them. She took one step forward, aligning herself shoulder to shoulder with the man who had entered the room because love has better instincts than any camera. She tilted her chin in a way that said no more. She didn't need to speak it. The tilt said everything. The line cook at the threshold saw that tilt and reached behind him to flip the corridor's breaker for the bathroom lights. Darkness would have been an advantage to the wrong person. He chose brightness instead. The fluorescence steadied, pouring unforgiving white across tile, across lies, across the shake in the manager's hand. Truth often looks worst under good lighting, but it keeps better. The manager's eyes darted to the camera again. His calculations fell apart. He tried a new angle. Pity turned toward himself, wounded indignation, the insinuation that a dangerous man had invaded his workplace. He started building a story where he was the protector of order and Amara had misinterpreted a harmless intervention. He counted on everyone's hunger for tidy narratives. Dominic ended the counting. He reached into his pocket and placed a second object beside the phone, a small silver token, unremarkable to most, unmistakable to a few. It caught the light and threw it back in a sharp line that ran along the manager's cheek. The line cook breathed in sharply. He knew that token. A ghost of a name ran through his mind, the kind that lives in alleyways and in the cautious respect of men who work late. A name that arrives in rumors like a weather front. The sort of name that redraws which doors stay open in a city. The manager didn't recognize it, not fully, but he recognized the way fear traveled through the others when they saw it. He recognized how quickly arrogance loses oxygen when reputation walks in. For a heartbeat, Amara wanted to shut her eyes and fall into the ease of being protected. Then the second heartbeat reminded her that protection without truth becomes another prison. She steadied herself at the sink and stared dead on into the mirror, not past herself, not away. She locked eyes with the woman in the reflection and made a promise that the world had failed to make. You will not be minimized. Footsteps approached at last. Official ones. The kind attached to authority that believes itself neutral. A supervisor, drawn from his office by the murmurs, rounded the corner and froze on the scene. He took it in, and in the space of one inhale, his mind built two pathways. One where he preserved the restaurant's reputation at the expense of reality, and one where he let the truth scorch the place clean. His career taught him to choose the first. His conscience, bruised and thin, rattled in its cage and asked for air. The supervisor cleared his throat and adopted that tone organizations love. Calm, measured, dispassionate. He asked if everything was all right, words that begin more cover-ups than storms. He saw the camera. He saw the token. He saw Amara's collar and the flush along her face where fingers had pressed. He tasted the metallic tang of fear that leaks into the air when violence almost happens but hasn't been cataloged yet. He hesitated. Hesitation was a doorway. Dominic did not walk through it. He waited. He knew the supervisor would choose, and he wanted the choice recorded by devices and by memory. He wanted the man to hear the sound his own cowardice made when it clicked into place. The manager rushed to fill the silence with his curated version. He tossed out timestamps, misdirections, the claim that he had prevented an altercation rather than created one. He coated his words in bureaucratic sugar and served them with a garnish of concern. The supervisor's eyes flickered back to the phone, and his throat worked around a swallow. Amara's lungs felt raw, as if she had been running, though she had moved only inches. She watched the story try to lift itself out of her hands and be carried away by men with titles. She had lost too many things that way. Not tonight. She stood a half-inch taller and took a breath that reached the bottom of her ribs. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance and faded. Inside, the faucet dripped again and sounded like a metronome set to measure courage. Dominic looked at his wife's raised chin, then at the supervisor's trembling resolve. He let a fraction of a smile ghost across his mouth, the sort of smile predators give each other when they both know who wins at the waterhole. Not joy, not gloating, recognition. The corridor gathered more faces, anxious and hungry. The line cook's knuckles went white around a dish rag. The busser pretended to be passing through. A server pressed a hand to her chest as if keeping a bird from escaping. They were not just watching a confrontation. They were watching a lesson. How a black woman fights to keep her own narrative from being stolen. How a man who loves her decides what justice can look like in a city that keeps misplacing it. The supervisor finally picked a lane. He said words that sounded like procedure would be followed, that investigations would be thorough, that everyone should remain calm. He gestured toward the office. He gestured toward forms. He gestured toward later. He wanted to move the moment into paper where it could be diluted. Dominic didn't move. He reached to stop the recording and glanced at the timer. He had captured enough for the first step of an operation he had already mapped from the parking lot to the last ledger in his head. Paperwork could flatten truth. Networks could amplify it. He possessed other instruments as well, older and quieter. He slid the phone into his pocket and placed his body so that when Amara walked past him, the manager would have to feel the wind of her dignity in his face. Amara stepped forward. The manager twitched but did not reach. He could feel the city reconfiguring itself around him, deciding what kind of stain he would become. As Amara crossed the threshold, the line cook murmured her name, not loudly, not for the crowd, but for the record inside himself that needed to mark the moment a woman chose to remain fully visible. She felt his respect on her skin like a blessing. It steadied her shoes on the tile. She did not look back. The rising tension did not release. It reorganized. The corridor became a fuse wire. The office, a powder room. The night reached that hinge where events stop being containable and spill into the street, where gossip becomes statement, where policy bends under pressure from something older and more relentless. Memory. Outside, the air had cooled. The sky held a bruised color that always follows heat. Dominic opened the door for Amara and let her pass. He kept a hand at the small of her back, not to guide, but to guard. The door drifted shut behind them and cut the corridor's gaze. People inside exhaled without knowing why. People outside inhaled news they couldn't name yet. Amara walked the length of the lot and felt her legs learn the ground again. Each step untangled her nerves. Each breath stitched the fabric of herself tighter. She thought of all the women who had left rooms like that without witnesses, who had been told their memory was hysterical, whose bodies had learned to carry unfiled damage. She thought of the city's appetite for forgetting. She decided to become indigestible. Dominic stood beside her at the car and let silence do what tenderness sometimes does best, fill in the places words would fumble. He watched the restaurant doors through the windshield and counted, not seconds now, but names. Men he would call, strings he would pull, channels that would flow like rivers redirected. He would make the building bleed truth until even the grout confessed. He started the engine. The dashboard glowed. The headlights carved a corridor of white along the exit lane. He pulled out slow, then eased onto the street with a calm that comes after decisions. Behind them, inside the restaurant, the supervisor ushered the manager into the office and shut the door with ritual care. The walls of that office held plaques about excellence and framed menus from opening night. They would hear the first tremors soon, the phone ringing from a number nobody ignores, the email hitting the owner's inbox that came with a signature that bends other signatures around it, the sudden appearance of lawyers who speak softly until they don't. The manager would learn new words: accountability, discovery, record. He would learn older words, too: consequence, reparation, memory. But that would be later. For now, the city itself seemed to lean toward a story it had tried not to hear. The pier lights blinked awake like patient witnesses. The diner down the road warmed its coffee pots. A gull carved the darkness with a cry that sounded like a verdict, rendered in a language only Tide understands. Amara turned her face to the open window and let the wind rinse the chemical taste from her mouth. Relief came in on a thin current, then widened. Rage traveled beside it, steady and purposeful. She understood that what had happened could not be fully undone, even if the man lost his job, even if the building changed owners, even if apologies multiplied until the city drowned in them. But harm can be turned into a map. She traced it in her mind, every place she would speak, every woman she would shelter, every young worker who would learn from her how to leave a room without leaving herself behind. The light at the next intersection turned red. The car slowed. The world paused. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled. Change gathering. Dominic's phone vibrated once on the console. A message slid across the screen, short and cold, acknowledging receipt of a video and requesting a location. The network had woken. The night had hands now, many of them. The city would not sleep well. He looked at Amara. She nodded once. Consent, not permission. Partnership, not protection alone. The nod spoke in a dialect only shared by those who have stood in a room designed to break them and walked out carrying the room's weight instead of their own. They turned toward the pier, because rituals matter. Coffee would steam into the air. The ocean would narrate the next steps. Plans made in the open last longer. Behind them, in the office, the first phone rang. The manager lifted the receiver with hands that had confidently arranged harm a half-hour earlier. He said his name with a steadiness he could not completely fake. The voice on the other line asked if he was alone. The door closed again. The building listened. The city sharpened. And somewhere between the pier and the restaurant, between the quiet love inside the car and the loud consequences gathering like weather, a new question entered the night. Not whether justice would happen, but what kind and at what price, and who would be brave enough to look it in the eye when it came. The car rolled to a stop beside the diner. The neon sign wrote red across the hood. Amara placed her palms on the counter of a booth as if it were an altar. The waitress behind the register caught sight of the mark at Amara's collar and swallowed hard with understanding that needed no translation. On the radio above the coffee pots, a song about endurance refused to end. Dominic's phone vibrated again. 3 messages now, 3 paths, 3 kinds of reckoning. His thumb hovered. He chose. The night leaned forward to see. The diner hums with the low thrum of neon and late-night forks. Coffee breathes steam in steady spirals, and the ocean outside keeps time like an old drummer who has seen every kind of night. Amara sits on the vinyl bench with her palms flat, as if anchoring herself to a surface that will not move under her. The mark at her collarbone darkens from air. Not pressure now, but memory. Dominic's phone glows on the table between them, unread messages stacked like loaded choices. He has already chosen a path, but the path has not shown its teeth yet. The first sign arrives as a vibration in the glass of the window. A convoy's rumble, black and whites first, angry lights carving the street into pieces. Then a dark sedan, unmarked, carrying a smell of politics and polished shoes. The restaurant across the way, the one that tried to swallow Amara whole, has lit up again. People gather near the entrance, curious and cautious, heads bent toward screens. The city has sniffed smoke and come looking for the fire. Inside the diner, time contracts. The waitress who noticed Amara's bruised collar tries to make herself smaller, then decides against it and plants her feet. An older couple at the counter stiffens with the knowledge of a story it has lived before. Dominic's expression barely shifts, but everything in him tightens to the size of a blade. He has spent a lifetime shaping chaos until it obeyed. He recognizes the moment when chaos tries to pick a new master. It begins where it always begins in cities like this. Authority arrives and chooses a direction, not toward the man whose hands left evidence, not toward the office where statements can be bent, toward the man in a tailored suit beside the black woman whose body carries proof of harm. The first pair of officers enters the diner, eyes moving past the bruise to the posture that looks like threat when a certain kind of training writes the test. Their hands float near equipment. Their language is calm the way winter is calm before it drops a roof. Amara's lungs seize for a half-breath as the patterns reveal themselves. She can predict the script now. Questions that turn survival into suspicion. tone that demands she be soft after being crushed. Promises of a thorough process that ends with her name on a file cabinet and her story leaking away through a bureaucratic crack. She can feel the weight trying to climb onto Dominic's shoulders, the pressure to choose between rage and erasure. Dominic moves his phone back into his palm. He does not thrust it forward. He does not plead. He lets the lens rest on the table like a third witness. He keeps still not because stillness is safe, but because stillness, on him, is a storm with its eyes open. A second car stops outside, and the restaurant's manager appears in the doorway across the street, flanked by the supervisor. Their faces are arranged in careful expressions: concern, confusion, competence. The manager's tie sits a fraction too tight over a throat that remembers his earlier arrogance like a phantom choke. He surveys the scene and begins composing his rescue narrative, the one he will deliver to anyone who will listen, the one that turns proximity into protection and reverses cause and effect until even mirrors believe the lie. Back in the diner, a plainclothes man steps in, the kind whose shoes announce a different floor than the rest of the room. He has been sent because someone, somewhere, received a video and recognized a last name that makes expensive doors recalcify. He scans the booth, clocking the man and his wife as if they are pieces on a chessboard whose value he is not fully prepared to measure. His attention snags on the silver token tucked beneath the phone. Respect or calculation flickers through him like a power surge. Amara raises her chin. The small action shifts the room's gravity. She thinks of every hand-me-down rule she was taught about staying safe around power. Make yourself agreeable, become soft, lower your gaze, soothe the air. She refuses them all. She straightens the line of her spine even as her heart pivots toward fear. This is the choice that changes bloodlines, whether to shrink in the face of injustice or to stand knowing how the standing will be punished. Outside, cameras multiply. Not only phones now, but professional lenses sniffing opportunity. A narrative will be born tonight no matter what. If she looks away, it will be born without her. The officers ask for clarity in the way institutions ask for obedience. The sound threads the diner, thin as a wire. Dominic gives them nothing extra, only the facts as they exist in the order they exist. He keeps his voice measured, the way men who have learned to survive attention keep it from turning into ignition. He places the existence of the recording into the air like a constant. He names the time. He names the room. He names the body that pressed his wife into tile and the hands that tightened. He does not name his own heat. He doesn't have to. The room can feel it. Amara adds what only she can add. The let-up. The weeks of looks. The slow escalation that everyone saw and nobody saw. The cornering of a body into a space with no locks meant to keep out a particular kind of harm. She speaks plainly. No ornate language to be dismissed as drama. No clipped sentences to be dismissed as hysteria. She stitches a record in calm thread even while fire burns behind her ribs. The waitress behind the counter steadies a coffee pot and memorizes every word like a psalm. Across the street, the manager starts to perform for a smaller crowd. Co-workers, a supervisor, a pair of people who arrived with legal pads and a talent for sounding neutral. He points toward the corridor. He gestures at the clock. He modulates his tone to the paperwork pitch. He implies 1,000 things with the confidence of someone who believes his voice was born credible. His words float out into the night and try to find purchase. Where they land is not where they used to land. The plainclothes man in the diner receives new messages. Short updates from up the chain, reminders of names best respected, suggestions about measured de-escalation. He acknowledges them without moving his face. He is used to rooms where reputation sets the thermostat. Tonight he has two forces to forecast, the violent arrogance of a small man with petty power and the cold, vast reach of a man who learned early that institutions only protect you when you own them or terrify them. Neither is the climax. The climax is the person between them who refuses to be a prop in their contest. The crucial moment arrives without fanfare. A second set of officers enters with a different posture, shoulders tight, eyes already deciding. They have just heard a version of the story from a manager across the street. That version centers on a disruptive outsider, a husband with a history of intimidation, a situation spiraling because a woman's grievance has become a man's threat. They approach the booth with that map unfolded in their minds. Their hands settle closer to tools no one should have to see. Time thins. The diner's air sharpens into glass. The waitress behind the counter stops pouring. The older couple holds breaths like coins under the tongue. Amara's skin remembers the bathroom, the tiles, the helpless tilt of a jaw under pressure. Her body trembles at the possibility that the story could peel itself off the truth again and wrap her in something cold with metal teeth. She could be dismissed, then punished for resisting dismissal. Her husband could be targeted, then punished for protecting her. The city knows how to paint those pictures quickly. Dominic sees the angle of a wrist, the posture of a shoulder, the glance that travels past a bruise to a suit. He recognizes danger not as spectacle, but as a sequence. In a fraction of a second, he can see the next 10 minutes if nothing interrupts. He feels every part of him that was built to end sequences like that ignite. His jaw tightens. His right foot anchors. The old version of him, the one the city whispers about, steps to the edge of the room like a ghost ready to take shape. Amara makes the decision that saves the night from burning to ash. Not a scream. Not a plea. A movement. She stands. The act is small and seismic. She rises without flinching, without apology, without performative fear. Standing in that moment changes the picture. The officers, trained to track threat, must also account for dignity. The camera phones catch a posture that reads as witness rather than accomplice. The plainclothes man adjusts his analysis. The waitress behind the counter watches the tremor settle out of Amara's hands and realizes she is watching someone seize authorship in real time. Amara speaks a single sentence in the shape of a statement. No names, no heat, just placement of truth into the center of the room where it cannot be ignored. Her voice carries the steel of a person who has been asked to ferry other people's comfort for too long and has decided to stop. The words land, and even the officers who arrived with a preloaded script cannot pretend not to hear them. Something shifts. Not enough to declare victory, not yet, but enough to prevent the worst kind of rewriting. The plainclothes man invites process into the booth without turning it into erasure. He recognizes the recording as more than evidence. It is ballast. He requests the copy, receives it, and feels the temperature of the night change because now the room is not just heat and accusation. Now it is record. Across the street, the manager notices the cameras tilting away from him. Panic adds a sheen to his forehead. He tries a new tactic, the wounded innocence that has postponed many reckonings. He conjures imagined context, sprinkles it with the dust of accusation reversed, frames his proximity to Amara as concern gone misunderstood. He offers to show the corridor, to act out the positions, to lead the investigation himself. All to maintain authorship. He does not realize authorship has already left the building. In the diner, another presence arrives. Not a car, not a badge. A man with a stained apron and the kind of tired in his shoulders that comes from lifting other people's nights. The line cook from the corridor stands in the doorway and takes in the scene. His eyes meet Amara's. He nods not toward the officers but toward her, as if asking permission to speak his own truth. She gives it with a look that contains gratitude and gravity. He describes what he saw without embroidery. The tightening, the angle, the grip, the way the room sounded when a body hit tile in a way that cannot be mistaken for an accident. He adds detail only a worker notices. The timing of the dishwasher's cycle, the break in the hum, the way the door latch sighed when pressure overpowered cheap hardware. He is not an orator. He is a witness. It is enough. It is more than enough in a world that starves for people willing to say what they saw. The officers recalibrate again. The fast ones at this art are rare. Tonight, a few of them catch up to the truth before the worst happens. The plainclothes man, still reading messages he will never quote, sees a safer route now, one that protects the department from a very public mistake and still allows the machine of procedure to turn. He nods once, a decision sealed. The manager, sensing control bleed out of his narrative, makes the mistake that writes his own ending. He tries to leave. Not the property, the story. He attempts to step sideways into a corridor of technicalities, to remove himself from proximity and therefore, in the eyes of anyone not paying attention, from guilt. It is a small movement, a pivot of the hips, the start of a retreat he has used whenever anger aimed at him became too precise. He does not get far. The supervisor, gripped by a late-arriving conscience or by fear of the names attached to Dominic's messages, reaches out and stops him. The gesture is not heroic. It is survival, but sometimes survival arranges itself on the correct side. The cameras capture the arrest of motion. The city loves images like that. Symbols frozen in pixels, read 1,000,000 times without context, and sometimes, finally, in the right one. Now the scene condenses. The officers place boundaries around bodies, not the way they often do with force first, but in careful arcs. The plainclothes man speaks 3 words that are not an order but a frame. This is evidence. The line cook retreats to the doorway, where he will wait to repeat what must be repeated. The waitress at the counter slides a glass of water toward Amara that becomes a sacrament of care. The older couple exhales. The neon light blinks, and then the ugliest turn arrives because injustice rarely leaves without trying one last trick. A message flashes across one officer's device. A memo that translates like a curse. The restaurant's legal team is already filing a complaint alleging trespass and intimidation by Dominic, attempting to angle the night so that the man who walked into a bathroom to stop harm becomes the man under investigation. The memo includes tired phrases about disruption of business, claims about prior incidents that never happened, insinuations that Amara's performance issues made disciplinary meetings necessary. It is the oldest move in the book. Load the language, aim it at the target, hope it detonates before the truth can be secured. For a beat, the tactic works. Doubt floats back into the booth like secondhand smoke. The officers stiffen. The plainclothes man balances interests in his mind like stacked plates. The manager, catching wind of the counterattack, straightens as if history has returned to its leash. Amara does not flinch. She has met this move before, in softer rooms. She knows the tone of it, the slickness. She recognizes its aim, not to win, but to tire her out, to force her to choose peace over justice, just to make the night end. She feels her courage teeter. It would be so easy to give in, to accept a promise of quiet resolution that heals nothing. Her hands tremble. Her knees threaten to unlock. Dominic senses the wobble and makes the smallest motion of the night. He taps the silver token once with a fingertip. The sound is nearly nothing, a click against laminate, a metallic punctuation. It says he is here, not as a storm bristling with thunder, but as ground steady enough to stand on. It says he has tools if institutions fail, but more importantly, it reminds her that she is not alone against a machine built to grind. The token glints once under neon and tells the plainclothes man the same thing. In a dialect of power he cannot pretend not to understand. Amara inhales until she finds the bottom of her lungs and discovers there is still space. She takes the recording back into her hands and scrolls to a frame the others have not seen. Not the shove. Not the tie. The moment before. The manager's face in the mirror as he closes the door with deliberate care, checking the hallway, making sure no one watches. Intent. The purest kind. She angles the screen so that everyone within radius cannot look away. The room hushes. The frame endures. Even the memo in the officer's hand loses volume, as if paper knows when its lies are thin against light. The plainclothes man nods again, the second decision of the night falling to the side that will hold. He states the path forward in a tone that arranges the room. Formal statements. Immediate suspension, preservation of evidence, a notation that failing to report the incident in real time constitutes an additional violation. His voice carries enough weight to drown the restaurant's legal fiction before it floats. The manager's mouth goes slack. He begins to understand that this will not evaporate at sunrise. He cycles through grief's stages in fast forward, denial, anger, bargaining, stopping longest at anger, as if rage might buy back privilege lost in the bright light of record. He glares toward the booth. He aims hatred like a projectile. He lands it on Amara's body because that is what men like him learned to do. The stare is a promise of future cruelty, the kind that finds work references and whispers to them, the kind that spreads rumors across invisible networks that still govern so much of a person's ability to eat. The look hits her like cold. For a sliver of a second, she wants to collapse under the knowledge that even when you win a night, the war keeps spreading. That even when the cameras capture truth, the shadows keep their audience. That even when policy bends toward rightness, the streets still slope toward harm. The despair tastes metallic. Then something unexpected happens. It begins at the counter. The waitress who slid the water leans toward the register and hits a small button. A bell dings. It sounds like nothing. It is everything. It is a signal she and her staff use when someone needs help and silence has failed. She lets it ring once, twice, then a third time. The older couple moves their eyes from fear to resolve. The line cook squares his shoulders again in the doorway. A sanitation worker at a corner table lifts a phone and types a message into a group chat with 100 names. The neighborhood wakes up differently. The officers don't understand the bell. The plainclothes man doesn't bother to try. Dominic recognizes it for what it is, a quiet chorus forming, the sound dignity makes when it refuses to be a solo. A siren rises outside, nearer now, a different tone than before. Ambulance, not police. The sound tightens the air again until another realization follows. Someone has called medical because the mark on Amara's throat is not theoretical. The sight of the EMTs entering resets the hierarchy in the room. For a moment, policy, pride, power, they all step back to let triage through. The EMT's gloved hands hover not as interrogation but as care. They shine a small light near the bruise and assess airflow, tenderness, the telltale swell that predicts deeper harm. The simple ritual of attention to her body makes Amara's eyes sting. She had convinced herself she didn't need it. She was wrong. Need is not weakness. It is proof that she survived long enough to ask for what is owed. The manager watches medical attend to the woman he tried to corner and feels something he might later call humiliation. It is not. It is proportion. For the first time tonight, his body occupies the correct size in the room. Outside, the crowd thickens. Someone has posted the still frame of the mirror, and the algorithm has chosen a side because conflict sells. But buried inside the shares and the comments, something else begins to sprout. Stories. People write about their own managers, their own corridors, their own tilting towards survival. A tide forms. It does not roar. It gathers. The plainclothes man receives one more message, short, final. The owner of the restaurant has called. Not to save the manager, to save himself. He will cooperate. He will issue a statement. He will suspend now, not later. He will review training. He will donate. He will perform. None of it touches the bathroom's tile. Some of it will matter anyway, if only because pressure that moves money can sometimes move policy. The man pockets the phone and steps into the part of the script that looks like leadership. Amara lets the EMT finish their assessment and nods at the offer of transport. She references cost in her mind, insurance, the way systems find new angles to make trauma expensive. The EMT reads the calculation and tells her a truth with their eyes. Living is the most radical invoice you will ever send to a city that tried to discount you. She nods again. She will follow later on her terms. Dominic watches the circle around his wife and feels the old ghost step back. He recognizes that the storm inside him can be stored without being denied. He will not pretend he didn't want to end the night with a kind of justice that tastes like iron. He will also not pretend that the justice happening here is small. It is not. It is the kind that replicates, because it is made of witness and record, and a woman who refused to be removed from the center of her own life. The officers begin the procession that nights like this require. Names, numbers, forms, carefully worded statements that will be picked over by people paid to parse commas. The line cook signs his name with a grip that steadies as he writes. The waitress adds her detail. The older couple provides a timestamp. The supervisor, pale with the realization that neutrality is just cowardice in a tie, says what he should have said an hour earlier. The manager, under a different light now, sits down for the first time. A final silence falls, the kind that comes when the storm has passed but the air can't quite believe it. The neon hum returns. The ocean keeps playing its one instrument. The EMT steps back. The plainclothes man folds his messages into a pocket that carries other people's nights. The officers, for once, do not hurry the room. They let the last breath of the climax leave through the door like steam. Amara looks at the window and sees herself reflected, not pressed against tile, but standing in open light with her shoulders even. She knows the resolution will not be clean. She knows statements mutate, that backlash is a hydra, that tomorrow might hurt in new places. She knows the restaurant will try to rebrand, that people will argue about tone and intention, that she will be asked to educate the same system that almost broke her. She knows some will call her brave and then vote for the next policy that makes another bathroom possible. She also knows something the night tried and failed to keep from her. She belongs in every room she enters, and if a room cannot hold that truth, then it must break. The convoy begins to disperse. The crowd thins to a residual hum. The plainclothes man offers a path to formal complaint that will actually be heard, not filed into silence. The line cook returns to his kitchen with a new story to tell young hires about how to stand when standing is dangerous. The waitress wipes the counter with the slow, careful movements of someone who has just watched a body decide to keep living loudly. Dominic picks up the token and the phone. He closes his hand around both. Two kinds of power, both real, one chosen for tonight. They step out of the diner into the cool night. The ocean lifts its voice. The pier lights blink in patient lines. The restaurant across the street looks smaller now, a box with its lid taken off. The city, which never stops chewing, pauses long enough to taste its own reflection. Somewhere deep in its machinery, gears click as if adjusting to a new setting. The wind moves across Amara's face and carries away the last stale breath of the bathroom. She inhales the salt of the bay and lets it settle into the place where fear had nested. Something else moves in. Not triumph, not relief, resolve. The night does not end. It changes chapters. And as the tide lifts under the pier and the first headlines schedule themselves for morning, one question hangs over the water. Bright and cold as a blade. What happens when a city is forced to choose between protecting its comfort and protecting the people it has always asked to endure? Morning comes like an apology that doesn't know where to begin. The sky, pale and wide, glows over a city still whispering about the night before. The restaurant, the glass room, stands with its doors locked, a closed-for-maintenance sign swinging softly in the wind. But everyone knows what really happened. Maintenance can't fix what was broken there. Inside, the tiled floor gleams, freshly scrubbed, but no amount of bleach can erase the imprint of what took place. The silence lingers heavier than the smell of disinfectant. And for the first time, the staff walks through the hall not with hurry, but with awareness. They look at the bathroom door differently now, because that door is no longer just wood and hinges. It's a symbol of everything that was hidden until it finally screamed to be seen. The aftermath. The manager's name hits the news cycle by noon. Headlines twisted in every direction, some cold and factual, some sensational, some defensive. The video leaks within hours, and the city splits into the same two camps it always does, those who see truth and those who need excuses to ignore it. For Amara, the hours after the storm feel surreal. She sits by her window, the world outside bathed in gold, but she can't feel warmth. The bruise at her throat darkens. The ache in her chest does too. She replays the scene again and again, not because she wants to, but because trauma loops like a broken record that won't eject. Each replay has the same impossible question at its core. Why did he think he could do that? But the answer is centuries long. It's the same answer carved into the foundations of every workplace where women like her are treated as less, every system where protection depends on complexion, every law that once called ownership justice. That's why it happened, because history still breathes through new mouths. Dominic, quiet as always, moves through their apartment like a shadow of control. His phone doesn't stop buzzing. Calls, offers, threats disguised as negotiations. Reporters wanting statements, activists wanting a cause, lawyers wanting a case. He picks up none of them. Because right now, what Amara needs is not a movement. It's a moment. to breathe, to exist without having to perform survival. The ripple effect by nightfall. The video crosses state lines. Talk shows debate it. Social feeds swarm with outrage and disbelief. Some call Dominic a hero. Others call him dangerous. But the loudest voices aren't the ones that matter. The quiet ones are. The waitresses in small towns who whisper, "I've been there." The janitors who remember what it felt like to be cornered and voiceless. The men who look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what kind of silence they've been complicit in. Amara watches these ripples spread. She sees her own face on a thumbnail of a video she never posted. And beneath it, a caption reads, "She fought back with truth." It feels strange to be turned into a symbol. She didn't want fame. She wanted safety. But sometimes the world only listens when pain is public. She begins to write. Not for news, not for pity, but for release. Her words bleed honesty onto paper, about fear, about strength, about the cost of dignity. And those words travel further than she expects. They get published, shared, studied, dissected. Students discuss them in classrooms. Professors cite her testimony in lectures about race and power. What began as trauma becomes text, and what was meant to silence her becomes voice. The system reacts. Too late, as always. The restaurant chain issues a statement. We are deeply saddened by this unfortunate incident and are committed to reviewing our policies to ensure a safe and inclusive environment. Words like saddened and incident cushion the blow. No one mentions the word racism. No one says assault. Corporate grammar has always been allergic to accountability, but the world has changed too much to let this one disappear. The staff resigns one by one. The investors pull out, and the franchise that once prided itself on prestige becomes a case study in what happens when silence meets its consequence. Still, Amara knows that justice is uneven. The legal case moves slowly. The headlines move faster. The public's attention faster still. By the time the trial begins, the internet has already moved on to a new scandal, a new victim. That's the cruel rhythm of awareness. Loud at first, then fading into background noise. But one person never forgets. Dominic. He sits beside her in every courtroom session, hands folded, eyes fixed. Not on vengeance now, but on truth. The kind of truth that outlives noise. The kind of justice that isn't loud, but lasting. And when the verdict finally comes, guilty of assault, termination of employment, lifetime registration, he doesn't smile. Because nothing about this is victory. It's simply the minimum of what should have been right from the beginning. Healing doesn't announce itself in the weeks that follow. Amara learns something profound. Healing isn't cinematic. It doesn't arrive with music or closure. It comes in fragments, like a breath that doesn't hurt as much as it did yesterday. Like walking past a bathroom mirror and seeing your reflection without flinching. Like touching your throat and realizing you don't feel fear there anymore. She returns to the diner, the one by the pier, on a quiet afternoon. The waitress recognizes her instantly. Their eyes meet, and without a word, the waitress just nods and refills her cup. That nod carries more compassion than all the apologies she's received combined. Outside, the sea moves like memory, never still, never gone. Amara stares at it for a long time. She realizes something that feels both heavy and freeing. What happened to her wasn't just about one man. It was about every system that gave him permission, every policy that protected his comfort more than her safety, every person who chose not to look until looking became trending. And yet, she's still here, breathing, speaking, living. That, she decides, is the greatest defiance of all. Dominic's quiet. War Dominic never returns to who he was before that night. You can't unlearn the sound of your loved one being hurt, but his vengeance doesn't wear guns or fists. It wears patience, influence, quiet power. He begins to work behind the scenes, funding legal defenses for other victims, donating anonymously to support groups, quietly dismantling the same kinds of men who thought they were untouchable. He never tells Amara the details. She doesn't ask. She knows there's a line between justice and revenge, and they live on opposite sides of it. But sometimes, their hands still touch in the dark, A City Learns. Its reflection, months later, a mural appears near the old restaurant. It's simple: black paint, white tiles, and a quote beneath the faint outline of a woman's silhouette. Silence protects no one. No signature. No credits. But everyone knows who it's for. The mural becomes a landmark. Students photograph it, activists gather beside it, and strangers pause to take in its message before walking into their own lives. Some say it's just art. Others say it's a warning. But for Amara, it's a mirror, one that reflects a world still divided, but at least awake, because now, when a woman of color walks into a room where she's underestimated, the conversation feels different. People hesitate before crossing the same lines. Awareness doesn't solve everything, but it changes what's possible. The message beyond the moment: racism doesn't die with verdicts. It mutates. It disguises itself in politeness, in policies, in the way people say, "I didn't mean it like that." It hides in "maybe you misunderstood," in "you're too sensitive," in the tone that says, "You're lucky to even be here." Amara's story isn't unique because it's extreme. It's powerful because it's ordinary. It's what so many endure quietly every day in offices, restaurants, classrooms, hospitals. The everyday violence that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves scars all the same. The incident forced people to see what comfort had hidden from them. It reminded the city that progress isn't a word you print on posters. It's a responsibility you live with every day. Because silence, when chosen by those who can speak, becomes complicity. From victim to voice, a year later, Amara stands on a stage reading her words aloud to a crowd that has come to listen. Her voice trembles at first, not from fear but from the weight of memory. Behind her, a screen displays the mural. Silence protects no one. She talks about dignity, about the quiet endurance of people who have been asked to be strong for too long. She talks about systems that demand proof of pain before offering compassion. She talks about her husband's restraint that night, how strength isn't always what you do, but what you refuse to become. When she finishes, the room stands, not for the story, but for the truth inside it, and as cameras flash, she doesn't smile. She simply bows her head, tears glistening, not from sorrow, but from the strange freedom that comes when pain finally belongs to the past. The world keeps turning, time moves on. Seasons change. New stories dominate the headlines. The world forgets, as it always does. But somewhere, in small acts and daily choices, her story lives on. In the way a manager hesitates before raising his voice at a worker. In the way a customer notices the humanity of the person refilling their glass. In the way someone finally reports what they once ignored. That's how change really happens, not in grand gestures, but in the unseen rewiring of conscience. And if even one person learns to pause, to think, to see, then that night, as dark and cruel as it was, becomes more than pain. It becomes purpose. The final reflection: Amara sits once more by her window, the same one she sat by the morning after it all began. But this time, the light feels different. It's warmer, softer. She still carries the scar. But she's learned something powerful about scars. They don't signify weakness. They're proof you healed. Outside, the city hums with ordinary life. Cars, laughter, sirens, all layered into a messy symphony of existence. She watches people cross the street. Different colors, different faces, all just trying to get somewhere safely. And she wonders how many stories like hers are happening right now, behind closed doors, behind polite smiles, behind the lie that says, "We've come far enough." Her hand rests on the window glass, fingers tracing the reflection of her own face. She whispers to herself, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a survivor who finally understands her power. Never again, because silence is what almost destroyed her. But speaking, living loudly, fearlessly, is what saved her. Epilogue. The weight. We all share. Racism is not a wound that heals by ignoring it. It's a mirror that demands honesty from those who dare to look. And for every Amara who stands and fights, there are countless others still waiting to be seen, still waiting for someone to believe them before it's too late. This story is not just about her. It's about all of us. About the choices we make when someone else's humanity is tested. About what we do when we see injustice unfold in real time. Do we turn away? Do we rationalize it? Or do we stand up, speak out, and refuse to let another person suffer in silence? Because every time we choose silence, another Amara learns the same lesson the hardest way possible, that justice delayed is humanity denied. Final words. She lived. She healed. And she changed the city, even if only a little. But the truth remains. Somewhere, another woman is being told to stay quiet. Another man is being judged for protecting her. Another system is deciding whose pain deserves to be heard. And so the question isn't whether this story matters. The question is, when will we finally stop needing stories like this to remind us what justice looks like? Because the world doesn't change when the guilty are punished. It changes when the innocent stop being afraid to exist.